We have to start commenting on these free practice sessions, obviously from the most criticized episode, namely the clash between Leclerc and Norris in free practice 2. In fact, Ferrari once again, guys, made a serious mistake in a weekend that started well, because in free practice 1 we saw a Ferrari that potentially can fight for the podium. It's there with McLaren. In free practice 2, they made this blunder, this mistake, releasing Leclerc, who then went on to occupy the pit lane while Norris was arriving, and Norris then went into the wall. He collided with the barriers. So now we will also see the penalty that Leclerc will receive for this. But the most important thing is to understand who is responsible. Is the responsibility with the team? Is it with Leclerc? Because let's look at the image together for a moment. I want to see it with you and analyze it. Here we see that the boss, the Ferrari engineer, tells Leclerc to stop, not to go. He signals with his hand to stop, and he goes anyway. But many could interpret it as go, proceed, you have the pit lane free, so that gesture can be interpreted. In this case, we see Leclerc goes anyway. He doesn't look to the right rightly because the driver looks ahead and continues on his line, and then goes on to hit Norris, who breaks the front wing. And so we will see what penalty Leclerc will receive. There is a precedent, namely Monaco of this year with Stroll, who received a grid position penalty, and it happened in free practice. We'll see what happens for Leclerc. The fact is that it will depend a lot on who takes responsibility, because if the driver assumes it, then the consequences, the penalty, goes to the driver. If the team takes responsibility, then we might see a fine and therefore not a grid penalty. The fact is, the damage is definitely worth more than a $20,000 fine, because a damage on the McLaren front wing that Norris then had to replace, a front wing is worth $100,000, $150,000. So we're talking about 10 times, even 10 times the price of the front wing. So we must also consider this, which is taken into account by the teams and the federation in the evaluation. At the moment I'm recording, the meeting between Leclerc and the stewards is taking place. So we'll see what decision will then be made by the federation. And also, of course, in mutual agreement with Ferrari and Leclerc. And we'll see a bit. But we have to analyze today's video, the free practice sessions. This was the most important episode that happened in free practice 2 that we had to talk about, and which, in my opinion, somewhat ruined Leclerc's weekend. Before we start, I obviously remind you to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any video. Here we cover all Formula 1 themed news and Ferrari themed news, the most important news. That said, I highly recommend liking, as it is essential to support the videos, and I sincerely thank you for your support. Of course, tell me your thoughts in the comments about the Leclerc and Norris episode. Let's go see the times of free practice 2, and then let's go comment together on other very important episodes. In free practice 2, in the end, there were several red flags, and we first saw the accident of Russell, who went to the wall. Then we saw the accident of Lawson, who also went into the wall. And we see up front Piastri in first position, second Ajar, who, by the way, Ajar is surprising, going very strong in these last races, except for Baku, where he struggled a bit due to the qualifying, but he is doing very well. Third is Verstappen, but the surprise of the day is definitely Alonso, fourth, who finished first in free practice 1. And Aston Martin, found here in Singapore, also because it has a track more in line with fewer straights. There are more curves. It's a city circuit where where Aston Martin can excel because it can go faster. We know that Aston Martin suffers from drag and aerodynamic resistance on various straights. In fact, it loses a lot compared to other teams, and in this case on city circuits, it can express its potential. Fifth is Norris, sixth is Stroll, indeed sixth. Stroll confirms a competitive Aston Martin. We see the difference between Piastri and Norris, first and fifth, by the way, with a 0.4 difference. It's a lot. Also considering that if we look at the tyre history, which is the history of the tyres used in the session, we see they have the same number of laps, 10 for Norris, 11 for Piastri, but the strategy was the same. Then we see indeed Stroll 6th, 7th Ocon, 8th Sainz, and one might say, wow, but Ferrari finished 9th with Leclerc and 10th with Hamilton in free practice 2. The most important free practice sessions, because as I've told you several times, pay attention to free practice 2 because they are the crucial ones in Singapore. They have the same conditions as the race and the qualifying because they are run at night, and therefore they are the most important, the ones to evaluate. But be careful, there is a detail I want to point out to you, namely that Ferrari used a different tire strategy due to the various yellow flags, red flags, etc. And so they did several stints with medium tires, then switched to soft tires, and then did fewer laps with the soft tires at the end. In fact, the time that Ferrari set is not indicative. Ferrari has a much better ideal lap time compared to what was shown in free practice 2. Let's take a look together. These are the ideal times from free practice 2, and we see that Hamilton could easily reduce his ideal time by 0.5, placing himself among the top 5. Similarly, Leclerc could have improved by 0.2, and moreover, they didn't do many laps with those tires, so they could definitely improve the time. Ferrari's performance is better than in free practice 2, but not even like free practice 1, so be careful not to be deceived, because in free practice 1 we saw this classification. Let me show you, with Alonso first, Leclerc second, Verstappen third, Hamilton fourth, but with both McLarens fifth and sixth. This isn't the classification either, which is a bit too optimistic. The classification of free practice 2 is a bit too pessimistic. We have to find a middle ground to find Ferrari's real performance. The fact is that teams struggled a lot in free practice 2 to find the limit. In fact, they tested more for qualifying than the race, even though in theory it was better to test for the race in free practice 2 because those are the same conditions you'll find on Sunday. So be careful with the many incidents we've seen, which we'll also look at together now, Russell's and Lawson's in particular. Well, we've seen that teams and drivers didn't have enough time to test the long runs, which will have to be tested in free practice 3, where, however, there won't be the ideal conditions of qualifying and the race. So be careful to take the times of free practice 1 and 3 with a grain of salt, as they are not ideal conditions. Having said that, let's look together at the incidents that slowed down free practice 2, starting with Russell's, which we see together at this moment. By the way, I must say that Kimi Antonelli made a similar mistake to Russell's, but by losing control while locking the front, while Russell, as we will see together now, loses the rear. Let's watch it together and comment. Here comes Russell. Near the braking point, then in the corner, we see that he suddenly loses the rear. When he approaches the center of the corner, he already loses the rear here. You see there's this counter steer. There's the pendulum effect, which is so called because you lose the rear and have no more control over the car. Here he regains control. The problem is that it's too late. He's already at a very high speed and heading towards the barriers. So he doesn't have control of the car and crashes into the wall, into the barriers in this case. It's an incident, a pretty serious mistake, especially since it was with medium tires at a time when he shouldn't have been pushing too hard, because we're not talking about qualifying pace, but rather race pace that needed testing. And making this mistake here at the start of the session compromises not only Russell's session, but everyone's. That said, he was lucky to break only the front wing, but we see that the control arms and suspension weren't broken. So in this case, Russell was also lucky in the accident. He was skillful, if you will, to direct the incident, making it a frontal impact rather than lateral. That should be said. That said, let's also look at Lawson's instead, who was also fast this morning, a Racing Bulls revival, we could say. As I mentioned earlier, Kimi also went long. Here, you can see an image of Kimi going long, but it didn't damage the car. He simply locked the front and went long in the same corner where Russell crashed. That said, let's look at Lawson's incident together. In this case, Lawson loses the rear again and crashes with a large part of the car into the right side of the barriers. Let's take a look together. We see here Lawson approaches, loses the rear here. Also here, there's a pendulum effect. Why are there so many mistakes by the drivers, especially with not finding grip at the rear? Because the track is very slippery. We also mentioned that it rained in the past days, and this is the result. A slippery track, difficult to manage, and the drivers need to find more grip to have more confidence, even at corner exit. So let's look at the mistake together here. I'll move to this side to show you better. Lawson loses the rear here. There's nothing he can do. He crashes with the right side of the car, especially the front right, which you see the tire also goes. In this case, he was lucky that it was practically at the end near the pit lane, and he returned, but these are seconds lost by the teams. In fact, we see here 26 minutes from the end that Hamilton was second, and Ferrari was following a different work program. They hadn't mounted the soft tires yet, while many of the drivers had already fitted the soft tires to begin the qualifying simulation run. So, and also do a few more laps to see the long run with soft tires. That said, we've seen Lawson's accident that slightly penalized his weekend, while on the other hand, Aggiara did much better by placing in second position. So far, Aggiaro hasn't made a single mistake, Lawson has made one. Be aware that the two of them are also competing for the seat next year, both to go to Red Bull, thus getting a promotion, and to stay in Racing Bulls, and thus not leave Formula 1. Be aware that we've already talked about this in past videos. This is an important battle for that Red Bull seat. So the battle between Tsunoda, Aggiara, and Lawson, but also to stay in Racing Bulls. Now let's look together, but first, let me say a few words for him, guys, because Fernando Alonso had a fantastic Friday. Great free practice 1, great free practice 2, especially free practice 1, finishing in first position. He said it from the start, he felt very comfortable with the setup of the car from the beginning. And it's a circuit that, in my opinion, he really likes, a street circuit that suits the characteristics of the car. So we might see Alonso fighting, in my opinion, for the top 5. A podium finish is really difficult. He said that the goal for Sunday is to finish with 0 points, but he was also a bit, in my opinion, yes, he underestimated himself a bit. He can do even better, in my opinion, maybe finish between 5th and 10th position, which is Aston Martin's goal to earn as many points as possible. That said, let's also look at, the modification Red Bull made for this Grand Prix. In fact, they are continuing to modify the car at Red Bull after the flaw they introduced at Monza on Verstappen, which then came to Baku also on Tsunoda. I introduced a new front wing. Let's look at it together and comment on it, because that made a difference today as well. And we saw it especially, here it's clearly visible. This is the FIA document I wanted to show you, and you can clearly see the edge of the front wing, the outermost flap that has been modified. It is much thicker, much larger, and this serves to increase the air incidence on the front wing, thus having more grip on the front end. And we have said many times that the RB21 struggles precisely at that point to generate grip on the front tires. This therefore serves to have more air impacting the front wing, thus pressing the car down at the front. This is essential on a circuit, for example, like Singapore, to have more directionality, to have a car that understeers less, so this is very important. We have also seen that even Mercedes wanted a modification to the front, and so they too are trying to improve performance on a street circuit like Singapore. These are modifications that are then brought to Singapore on street circuits, and then we have to see if they are reused on other circuits. It's not certain, but this certainly helps a street track like Singapore. That said, let's also look at telemetry to do an analysis. I'll also show Hamilton's helmet, of course, a special chrome gold helmet. Very beautiful in my opinion. I really liked it personally to see it even on the onboard. Beautiful. In fact, speaking of this, let's also look at the onboard of Lewis Hamilton and we'll comment on it together. Because we have the view. By the way, it was there before as well. Okay, I'll show you this detail here in free practice 1. We also saw Piastri complaining about Hamilton, who stayed in his trajectory. Let's look here together. Yes, here it says Ferrari needs to invest in new mirrors. I hope they do, because it points out that Hamilton was right in the middle of the racing line. It's not true in the sense that Hamilton had moved to the right of turn 1, and Piastri remained in the middle. Here we see the image together. You see here that there's Hamilton on the right and Piastri coming, but where could Hamilton go in that case? Well, anyway, this is a small detail from FP1. Let's now look at Hamilton's lap in F1 in FP1, and we'll comment on it together, and also look at the telemetry of FP2 and FP1. So let's replay Hamilton's lap. Here it is. Let's look together. We see the very beautiful helmet, and let's look at some strategic points. In particular, I want to show you the rotation of the SF25. Let's see here. You see there's always that slight understeer that doesn't allow the car to rotate enough. In fact, it always arrives slightly wide at each apex. In every mid-corner, you can see that the Ferrari struggles a bit more. Not so much in fast corners where Hamilton finds grip, but still you see there's a lot of steering angle. So it means he has to force the car to stay on line to hit the apex correctly. Let's move on. Let's see here, for example. You can see here too, he manages to reach the apex, but he always has a lot of steering angle, and that's something that differentiates him from McLaren, who manages to get there better. In this case, you can also see how much Hamilton has to steer to reach the apex, and then he has a bit of oversteer on the exit. Let's move on. This is a winding part of the track. Here is the hairpin. Let's go see it together. With Hamilton reaching right at the apex, and here comes the braking of the chicane, a tough point, it's not easy. Sorry, here before the chicane, this is the hairpin where Hamilton loses a bit of control, and then there's the braking for the chicane down here. Let's go see them together. This is the modified point in Singapore. We see here it gets right to the apex, but the car becomes quite twitchy when it goes up on the curbs and then comes back down, because the suspension is pretty stiff here in Singapore. Obviously, they try to find the right compromise between stiffness and softness of the suspension to avoid that impact when coming off the curb, but at the same time, the stiffer you go, the more speed you can get in various accelerations and thus in traction. So this is a bit of Hamilton's lap, which ends here with the last corner. In this case, this is the lap of Hamilton that I wanted to show you. Now, let's also look at the telemetry. And first, I'll quickly show you the Ferrari layout and the aerodynamic configuration they chose with a high downforce wing. Obviously, for Singapore, as well as the front wing, we see the flap very inclined to increase the wing's angle of attack. And now let's go see the telemetry together. Let's see if there is any news about Charles Leclerc and the penalty. Not yet. Anyway, guys, don't worry, I'll let you know in the comments if there's any potential penalty for Leclerc. I'll also show you this very interesting comment here. Lewis did 2 flying sectors, here he did 2 fast sectors after the flags in FP2 with tires that had already completed 3 laps. So he could go very fast. Leclerc's pace is in line with that of, Hamilton's is in line with Piastri's, only he had to abort the lap in the 3rd sector, Hamilton, so that's why he didn't finish. So Ferrari's pace is there, we haven't seen 100% in free practice 2. Let's also look at the telemetry. First, let's do a comparison between Leclerc, Hamilton and Piastri. Piastri who came first in free practice 2. So let's compare the laps from free practice 2. We can see from the telemetry how Piastri did many laps on soft tires and did the first fast one and then went to manage the pace a bit, if you will. Anyway, the car had a bit of fuel load, this is worth noting. While if we look at the other side, Hamilton did a few laps. Hamilton is in white, so he did a fast lap, he did it like at 3:31. So in the middle of the session, if you will. Instead, Leclerc went a bit further at 3:51, but not at the end, and he had to. He only did 1 fast lap, even Leclerc, so really not much. We see the telemetry comparison, and we see that in the telemetry, Ferrari loses in fast corners. It also loses in slow corners, but on straights, on the stretches, it actually goes even faster than McLaren. So let's say in acceleration and also in top speed, before each braking, it goes very fast. It also performs well in braking. It struggles a bit in the middle part in particular. We see that in the 3rd sector, the 2nd, 3rd sector, actually more the 2nd, Ferrari struggles to manage the aerodynamic load and to go fast to push hard in the corners. Let's see here, for example, this corner here, we see Piastri's difference of even 12 kilometers per hour. We also see here the difference of Piastri, how he goes faster through the corner. In most of the corners in the central sector, he goes faster through the corner, with Leclerc struggling a bit more, Hamilton too, but Hamilton and Leclerc alternate a bit in the corners, where one goes faster on the other side. That said, Ferrari's first sector is not bad, in fact it goes quite strong. It mainly suffers in the second sector. In the third sector, the gap remains almost unchanged. Let's also see the comparison with Verstappen, because it's very interesting. Let's see the comparison in this case, in free practice 1 between Leclerc, Hamilton, and Verstappen. Let's look at the difference together and see that Ferrari is very fast. In fact, in free practice 1, Ferrari managed to go faster with Leclerc compared to Verstappen. And indeed, if we look at the lap difference, Verstappen went faster throughout the lap, but then struggled in the last sector where he lost a bit to Ferrari. Verstappen, who managed to go very fast in the driven part, in the central part, also thanks to the incidence of the front wing, which had a more pronounced, a more inclined flap, allowing him to go a bit faster. I also want to say that Verstappen tried both a less loaded and a more loaded front wing in free practice 1, just as Tsunoda did. They conducted various experiments before eventually promoting the new front wing. So that's a bit of the difference in this case. We see that Hamilton struggled a bit more in the central sector compared to Leclerc, who went faster. We also see the difference between Verstappen and Leclerc in free practice 2. Yes. And here we see the difference. Leclerc lost a lot in this corner, even compared to Piastri. We saw it earlier, he lost a lot in this corner here, going from about 1.8 seconds behind to 0.5 seconds behind. So really a lot. He practically lost 0.3 seconds in one corner, and so it's a hairpin, a very strong braking, okay? Where you need to avoid oversteer, reach the apex correctly. Maybe the car wasn't too stable in braking. That's why Leclerc lost so much. That said, let's see how fast Ferrari can go in the first sector. It loses a bit in the second sector, which is a bit of a critical point for the Rossa at the moment. But as mentioned earlier, note that Leclerc and Hamilton haven't done as many laps as their rivals. Let's also look at the telemetry, instead in Verstappen, Norris, Piastri. So the battle at the front, in this case in free practice 2. And we see how Piastri makes a difference compared to the others in the first sector. Then in the second sector, Norris and Verstappen even go faster than Piastri, but then slowly lose in the last sector, in the second sector. And in the last sector, they lose quite a bit in the final part, let's say. Especially Norris loses a lot to his teammate. Also indicating that significant thermal management of the rear is needed, because today there was a lot of slipping. So if you lose grip in the final part of the circuit, well, you lose a lot. So it's important to manage the overheating of the tire for the entire lap with soft tires. So pay attention to this detail also for qualifying. That said, we've pretty much covered everything. Watch out for Aston Martin, as I said before, they can be competitive. Watch out for Ferrari. Don't underestimate them, because in my opinion they can do well this weekend. But the gaps are very close. Let me show you the standings of free practice 2 again. 0.1, 0.1, 0.1, 0.4, 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, 0.6. That is up to Norris. The top 4 are within 1.6. And then they come from Norris onward, they're still close. From 5th to 8th are within 1. So be careful. Saints as well. And we haven't mentioned Williams or Haas with Ocon either. Great performance on their part. But it's also worth mentioning that Ferrari wasn't at 100% at that moment. So Ferrari's gap of 0.7 from the top isn't accurate. It's closer, as Ferrari is currently in 5th, 6th position, there with Norris with a gap of 0.4 as I see it. There's a bit of uncertainty for Alonso regarding the engine mapping, as well as the configuration, and also for Hajar. We'll see if they can confirm tomorrow, but in theory in Singapore, being a street circuit, there shouldn't be too much play with engine mapping, maybe with fuel load. But in theory, the laps are the ones they've done, so they should all be quite close. It will obviously be important to confirm the performance tomorrow. For Ferrari, it will be important to improve tomorrow. And we'll also see whether this penalty for Leclerc will come or not. Let's hope not, because it would ruin the Monegasque's weekend. And for Hamilton, it's crucial to try to confirm what we saw today, because we saw a good Hamilton close to Leclerc in free practice 1, and Hamilton ahead of Leclerc in free practice 2. So we can see in free practice 2 he didn't finish ahead, but was very close, just 20 thousandths behind. So we can still say a strong Hamilton, and if Leclerc were to receive the penalty, he should be the leader to carry Ferrari forward. So we'll see if he succeeds. Let me know in the comments your opinion on free practice 2 and free practice 1, on the incident between Norris and Leclerc, on Russell's incident, on Lawson's incident. Let me know your thoughts, how you see Alonso, if he can do well, Verstappen, how you see him for this weekend. And we've talked about a bit of everything. We've seen all the episodes I'm just reviewing. We've also seen we need to quick talk about the cooling system. I'll show it briefly here with these illustrations, and let's see how it works. We know that one can install the cooling system, this cooling suit, or have ballast on board the car. So the drivers will then choose because it has been declared a race where the heat is excessive. So it's necessary to have this cooling suit. Additionally, there is also an air duct that cools the single-seater and also the cockpit area with dry ice. Let me know your opinion in the comments. As always, I obviously remind you to leave a like, subscribe, and activate notifications so you don't miss any Formula 1 and Ferrari themed videos. That's all from here. See you in the next video.